We can bring the laptop.
Well, what I'm gonna do is I need to get the lights down. Oh, thanks. Okay. I'm gonna need to get the lights down. So let me just begin by thanking Farah and Joe and the other organizers for putting together this event and inviting me to be part of it. I'll say a few things later after I show the documentary that I'm going to show, The Death of an Imam. It's a very short documentary, it's about 16 minutes. But it is part of a bigger project called Islam, Muslims, and Journalism Education. And I am the coordinator of this project with Jerry Zaldiz, who is a professor in the assistant professor in the School of Journalism here at Michigan State University. And she and I were the beneficiaries of a grant from the Social Science Research Council in 2009 to do a project on Muslims in the media that had a kind of outreach component to it that tried to work with journalists in the area, especially to encourage faculty with expertise on Islam to do some work, make themselves more available to journalists. And one of the main components of our project has recently been commenting through this blog. You can see, I don't know how well you can see it. It's not, it's not showing very well on the screen right now. But we have regular, like 2 times, 3 times, sometimes a week, posting on current events, but also events that are taking place in Michigan specifically, or related to mid-Michigan and that concern Muslims. We'll also do things that have a national or international significance. We're producing videos, mostly interviews, short, sort of compact discussions with experts on particular issues. Sometimes these are artists from the Middle East or Muslim majority countries in general. Sometimes it involves journalists or experts, and so we're covering a wide range of things. And the goal is to provide a resource for journalists, journalism students, the general public. It's open to anyone, and you can see the URL is imageimage.msu.edu. So as part of this project last summer, we had a little bit of money left over, so we produced this small documentary, and Professor Obasi asked me if I would present the project, and I think that it's appropriate to show you the documentary because it's small and it allows us to engage some of the issues that have to do with traumatic experience that impact Muslim communities, particularly Muslim community in Michigan. And so I'm going to just show you this, and then we'll have, if time allows, I have some comments I'd like to make about the impact of this particular incident on Muslims. So, can I get those lights all the way down? Do you know how the volume's going to be on here? Not sure. Sorry about that. I have an I/O issue here. Anybody?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, minimum of the mic down by
Important aspects of this conference is that typically Muslims aren't considered in terms of their mental health. There's this idea, I mean, this was true for blacks, working class people, others who were considered in some ways to be, outside of the norm. They only if you were in the norm did you actually have mental health issues, or was mental health ever really considered to be a factor in your community? Because presumably you had other things. I mean, it's a luxury. Mental health is a luxury, and certainly psychiatric treatment is, to a large degree, still a luxury for a lot of people who do suffer mental health disorders. So there's this assumption that somehow whatever Muslims do, they just do it naturally, they just do it. And that includes, should they be engaged in suicide bombing or anything else that might be associated with terrorism, so that when a Muslim commits an act of ostensible terrorism, that's assumed to be done in perfect and total sanity, as if there is no disorder involved there. So, this we can see this contrast, for example, when non-Muslims commit crimes that are similar, but it's assumed that they somehow are mad. So when Gifford was shot, her would-be assassin, it was like he has a mental health issue. But when the military base in in Texas was shot up by an enlisted man who was a Muslim, and his name was Hassan, who was serving in the army, it was assumed that he had to have some kind of political motivation. And obviously, he also had some mental health disorders. So there's this assumption that Muslims don't have mental health disorders, even when they commit crimes and do.
What? Public.
Okay, great, thank you. So I think that the significance of the conference is to draw attention to the fact that mental health issues are actually quite universal, that they don't discriminate, that it's not something that some have and others don't have. But the tendency has been to privilege the idea that white middle-class individuals in the US and in the world are people who suffer from mental health disorders, whereas Muslims and others do not. And so I think this is particularly important. But the other aspect of it that I think that it draws attention to, and one that we need to think about more broadly, is not just at the individual level, but at the collective level. The collective level of Muslims, and how Muslims as a group experience trauma in the United States, and how they experience it both by what happens domestically, but also what happens internationally. And so this is extremely important. But I would also say on the other side, there's a kind of national neurosis associated with Muslims, that it's not just Muslims that are experiencing this trauma, but it's the way that particular events have been made into a kind of neurotic condition that we call Islamophobia. I mean, we call it that, and that's a kind of neurotic condition. When we talk about fears and we think about the various ways that fear has been theorized within psychoanalysis in particular, that there's this kind of neurotic behavior that isn't individual. It's actually operating at a much broader scale, and one needs to think about almost national neurosis that's at work, as there was with racism or in other forms. I mean, this is a kind of neurotic condition that needs to be addressed and brought to the surface as a mental illness that goes beyond particular individual behaviors, but is informed by the media. So let me just stop there now that I have this, and I'll go ahead and play the movie, and we can, if there's time, we can talk about it more.
First religious leader to be shot dead by the U.S. government since 1993. So you started questioning, what's going on here.
To say that these people were trying to overthrow the government, when in fact they were struggling just to clean up their own neighborhood. They couldn't even clean up a quarter-mile radius of the mosque. It's a totally asinine assertion.
So if you're going to shoot dead a man of faith, you have to know what's going on, and the government was not being open as to what happened that day.
It has implications that go beyond what public perceives, but it
That day, October 28th, I was in a meeting in the federal building, only a couple of floors away from the FBI. I received a phone call from Andrew Arena, the special agent in charge of the FBI in this district, and he told me that I wanted you to hear about this before It's all in the media.
The group's imam was killed in a shootout with the FBI.
We had a raid, and there were some people in your community who were arrested. One of your imams was killed in the process, and we tried doing what we could do, but it got out of hand.
Agents killed Carswell's father yesterday in a shootout at a warehouse in Dearborn. The feds say he was the leader of a radical Islamic group.
But there's another Islamic community which few know about. Starting tonight and continuing all week, I'll bring you the exclusive results of a 7-month look at blacks in Islam. Black Muslims represent many different viewpoints and roles. Some are flag-waving Americans, others want radical change now. Some of the most conservative Muslim blacks can be found in the poorest sections of Detroit.
My father was a family man.
Lukman Abdullah is a cab driver. His meager income supports his wife and 10 children who live on the second story of this dilapidated mosque on Joy Road.
He was like really very strong-willed, very confident, had a lot of belief and conviction. He wanted to stand for something.
He said, has it ever come a time upon man, upon people, wherein they were a thing unremembered? There has never come such a time.
And he lived on this extremely poor block in one of the poorest cities in America, trying to raise the moral standards of that neighborhood.
Despite the bleak surroundings, Lukman refuses welfare.
Because if I had just dwelled on myself and my dreams of having wealth and having a family and these things, having a good life, I would have never become Muslim.
Lukman is called the Imam, or spiritual leader.
He kept trying to make his friend be the leader, and he was like, no, nobody wanted to take it, and it just made my father. And he ended up being Imam Lukman, not asking for it, not even wanting it.
Just tell them the truth. We do not want, and we will not keep on supporting you killing our brothers and our sisters in any land.
Lukman and many others like him believe in revolution, but not the political kind.
There's no way of escaping that. Sooner or later, it's going to be some type of revolution in America. Pertaining to Islam, pertaining to the people either accepting or rejecting, and so it will be a war.
Well, I started getting phone calls from people in the American community telling me that there was some sort of activity involving federal agents in Dearborn, but they were sort of unaware of what exactly was going on. So when we heard that, we mobilized. We sent several reporters out to the scene. I remember staying here and making phone calls because I thought that would be the best way to find out what was happening.
Federal agents stormed this warehouse and in a shootout killed Christopher Thomas, a Detroit imam known as Lukman Amin Abdullah.
A Muslim leader was shot dead and shot 21 times by federal agents. In the first day, we didn't really grasp how serious that was.
Official versions state that the religious leader was armed and opened fire on the federal agents.
I think the information that we've developed through sources, through surveillance, through other means showed us that criminal activity was going on in that location. We don't target religious institutions, we don't target buildings, we target bad people who are hiding in those buildings.
It's safe to say that Imam Lukman was being attacked by dogs, and that the most probable scenario was that because he was being attacked alone by dogs, that he probably pulled out a firearm and discharged it.
Was the FBI deliberately being provocative by sending him in this attack dog? The FBI does consider their dogs to be an agent, right? So when you shoot at them, you're shooting at an agent, and they have the right to return fire.
I can assure you that there was nothing done intentionally. I mean, I made the final decision to use that dog. That was the last decision I made. We knew this guy, 100% sure knew he was going to have a gun, because he always has. He usually has two on him. We knew he was going to have at least one gun on. We knew from statements that he basically said, I'm not going down. I'm going to take as many agents with me as I can.
The FBI agents were in close proximity to him, with guns drawn, and they shot him. And basically, like the dogs were a bait that caused a reaction, which then gave them the justification to shoot him.
The broader question is, Did the FBI agents know that going in, and if so, were they setting them up? That's what some people argue. That they knew that they were going to send in this dog, he was going to instinctively react by shooting at the dog, and that they would fire in return and shoot him dead.
Do I send my agents in there to put hands on him at close quarters when he can get shots off of those agents? The option was to use the dog.
This entire front lawn area was swarmed. This raid was caught live by Brad Edwards.
They're going to go in now, try to arrest the individual they identified, go in quick and get out of there.
Tonight, Detroit police at the home of a Detroit mosque called Masjid al-Haq on Claremont Street. The man inside connected to a radical group known as Imam, or Brotherhood.
The media stories mentioning this group that we never heard of before called Ummah, that was a radical group that had planned on overthrowing the government.
A security guard that had been standing outside the mosque at the time of the prayer was asked to get down to the ground. You hear the shotguns rack. They had gone up this stairway with their shotguns while the members of the mosque were conducting their routine evening prayer on this floor.
Well, I was in Windsor because I had my daughter was due any day. People were calling my phone and saying little crazy stuff. They didn't say they killed my pops or nothing like that. After I find out he's been killed, then I get some weird calls like, they're looking for you. You know, they're saying armed and dangerous. They're saying all this crazy stuff. I'm like, at large. Like that's what you use when you say a bear is loose. They didn't really say why. They just started saying a whole bunch of foul stuff. He's a bad guy. They were just talking about me and saying all of them, like me and then like several other people that I know.
Right now, 2 other suspects are on the wanted list, and investigators are trying to get them off the streets.
They're not really saying what we've done or who we've been so bad to or who's really even saying this. A couple of people are saying, like, well, the FBI said they're bad. So they said they're bad because the FBI said, I'm like, but the FBI just murdered somebody. And they don't take me to jail. I don't go to jail in Canada. All the ones I've been, they say he's captured in Canada.
Today, the feds captured this man, Mujahid Carswell, who they say was on the run in Canada. He and 8 others were arrested on a series of federal charges, including conspiracy and gun violations. Agents killed Carswell's father yesterday in a shootout at a warehouse in Dearborn. The feds say he was the leader of a radical Islamic group.
On October 28th of 2009, something unprecedented happened. The fatal shooting of the Muslim American in
Amin Abdullah was killed in an exchange of gunfire with agents.
The media framed it as fundamentalist, radical imam killed in raid. Channel 4, it was the local NBC affiliate, and they did the most atrocious job, even comparing him to or being a suspected perhaps terrorist cell.
Actual audio tape recordings of Abdullah preaching and promoting violence against government and law enforcement. They were told that Abdullah traded guns and knives and stated he was willing to strap on a bomb and blow up everybody if they come to get me.
So when we first read the complaint, we were like, wow, these people were radicals, they were extremists, they were plotting to overthrow the U.S. government.
I think that the Detroit coverage was uneven. Some, I think, maybe had an agenda. Some were trying to basically create stories where there were no stories. I hate to see people jump to conclusions, but to me, obviously the religious aspect of this was played out.
And the media took off and run in regards to this characterization that was given by the government without any real questioning.
The initial stories dealt primarily almost like a crime story first. You had the police, you had the police tape, you had the flashing lights. The narrative was primarily drawn from the use of police officers and law enforcement officials as virtually the only sources on the incident itself. The frame, the suggestion, was terrorism by implication. These were terrorists by implication.
The media never went and interviewed anyone to get a different opinion than what's great basically with the government narrative, which is the easier narrative to go with.
You know, oh my God, this guy is a huge terrorist, you know, he's flying north with the government, and your juices are flowing, and you're getting excited, and you know, you think you have this crazy guy here that they've caught. And a lot of times people will only read the initial kind of what happened. So the average reader may follow the Lukman case day one, and then they fade out day two.
It took a while before leaders of local Muslim groups in the community were interviewed, and that was not part of the original coverage.
I know all great things about him, as well as the community, the Christian community. I mean, we have Jewish, all kinds of people who come here to support this guy.
And the fact is that then the story then moves to the back pages, and people go on, and nothing much happens.
Supporters of the clear say Abdullah was a peaceful religious leader, insisting the raid and the shooting were uncalled for.
Channel 4 did another whole piece, and they did a teaser that ran for about a day and a half.
Now the defenders can tell you who shot Freddie.
Who shot Freddie the dog when he was killed on a raid of a radical Muslim player, Mr. Kevin Dees. He has a picture of Freddie the dog in the right hand and a picture of Imam Lukman in the left. He's making comparisons between the dog and the Imam in regards to the shooting. The initial media framing about this man being a terrorist or a radical began to unravel a little bit. I will say, though, that the Detroit Free Press, in comparison to other mainstream media, stepped out and began to write editorials and began to question this case both from the journalist Garrett Wariku as well as the editorial staff and Jeff Garrett began to write articles calling for an independent investigation and began to question the FBI's narrative.
When you look closer at it, you started to see, well, you know, there's no terrorism charges. They don't have any direct foreign links. What exactly is there? And then slowly start realizing the government had used informants. The allegations of stolen goods were not really stolen goods. They were government-bought goods that they gave to the mosque. And so it started to shift in the later days as you started to see, well, maybe the government's case isn't quite there.
This was a tragedy. This is not how we wanted this to end. But one person made a bad decision that day, and it wasn't me. I don't get up every morning, the agency don't get up every morning and think, okay, who's constitutional rights we violate today? You know, who can we go to school with today? Our thought process, how we protect our community, protect our ability, and go home safe.
So the shift in the coverage of him was when we started talking with people in the community, and people in the community were saying, you know, this guy really wasn't a radical.
Well, I think that the most important thing that we did was come out very strongly and challenge the initial narrative. We had meetings with the Detroit Free Press editorial board. We met with the local NBC affiliate, Channel 4, and we challenged the initial framing. The mayor of Detroit called for an independent investigation. The Detroit Board of Police Commissioners and Congressman John Conyers, which leads us now to the DOJ doing a civil rights review of the FBI's action regarding Imam.
All praise is due to Allah and His Lord of all the worlds, and all praise is due to Allah many times, and all praise is due to Allah in every circumstance and in every condition and in everything.
On that day, each of the options we had. So the agents in there put hands on this guy. You know what? In hindsight, I'm glad I didn't. You know, because I'd probably be, I probably would have lost at least one agent that day.
The DOJ has failed to investigate potential misusage of informants acting as agent provocateurs in this case.
A local Muslim leader accused of dealing in stolen goods, shot and killed by the FBI. 3 investigations said that the agents did nothing wrong, why the controversy won't die.
I'm going to say that the media obviously plays a crucial role here in shaping opinions and views on Muslims, and also in stimulating, provoking certain kinds of attitudes. And so one of our goals here is to really address how there's a kind of tie-in with the media and this neurotic behavior that we're seeing, not just among individuals who are Islamophobic, but in fact responses like this. I mean, this verges on almost psychotic type of behavior. We can go in and kill these people. And what we've seen is that this particular incident was completely orchestrated. I mean, there was no reason, absolutely no reason, to set up the raid on the warehouse. They had been surveilling Imam Luqman Amin Abdullah for 3 years with agents that had infiltrated, well, not actually agents, but informants. They had transcripts that go back some time. They had a warrant for his arrest the day before the raid. They could have gone to his home and arrested him, and what they did was they orchestrated this raid, which resulted in his killing. And then later, they raided the mosque. After shooting him, they raided the mosque, as you saw, and subsequently they raided his home and stormed his home where his wife was, and detained her, and they were filing charges to have her deported. She's not a U.S. citizen, and she's currently on a tether, and she's homeless as a result. So the impact, you can imagine the impact on the family directly. We saw two of his sons commenting on how this has affected them, and or at least their comments on the events. So the most immediate effect in terms of creating a kind of emotional and psychological instability within that community, of course, is on that family that had to grieve the loss of their husband and father. But more generally, I mean, this was a man who was a pillar of that particular impoverished community, as Niraj Oriku mentioned. I mean, this is one of the poorest neighborhoods and one of the poorest cities in the country. And he had been functioning very much as a community self-help individual, providing resources to homeless people who slept in the mosque. It was a house that had been converted into a mosque. And the kind of service that he was providing to these people who in many cases already were suffering from various forms of what we would consider to be mental health illness, such as addiction problems, and had worked very closely within that community to clean it up, especially having to do with drug addiction and crimes related to drug use. So his role there was crucial in producing a kind of stability within that community and providing resources that no longer are available, or at least less available in his absence. So someone who actually was providing a social good to that community was removed. And so we have to ask the question, it's not the hated and the hater, as was mentioned earlier by our previous speaker, but really the way that this has become part of a broader tendency in the United States to infiltrate mosque communities, mosques that in fact are providing social goods in those communities, that are looking for ways to integrate Muslims more fully into the communities and to build relationships, interfaith relationships and other kinds of relationships. And so the neurotic behavior and at times even psychotic behavior resulting in death or injury to people in these communities needs to be addressed very closely as a national problem, not one that's just a problem of Muslims. And I'll stop right there, and I don't know if we have any time for questions. I know you're running a little bit late.
We can take one or two questions.
Please.
Can you kindly come? The mic is here. The mic right there.
My name is
Maybe you can ask the question and we can repeat.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and ask me the question.
Yeah. My question was, my name is Mohammed Hanif. I've been teaching global terrorism for the last 10 years. And I concluded that, on the same topic, that is neurotic behavior, I concluded there is a deliberate neurotic behavior created, and there's a preconception of ideas toward any behavior. It doesn't matter what community you belong to. But if you make a deliberate neurotic perception in your mind, then your conclusion will reflect those perceptions. And that's what we have not addressed. And sometimes the empowerment of the communities, if they are in minority doesn't mean the number. Minority is the question of the empowerment. And when the empowerment is dictated in your favor, whether it's using the media or other resources, then that reflect the same kind of behavior. And I think the very clear example is right now in the United Nations against Libya. Even though there is a terrorist behavior in that, but I feel that if the Libyan government is defending their people, why they will have anti-aircraft gun in Libya, why they have the other things which the rebels have, where they get it from, where all of those things. So I said that neurotic, deliberate behavior which is organized, not necessarily by plan, but it is developed overall in the Western society. Please address that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it's an important connection to make to the international context. I think that in the sense that there's some kind of, I mean, you have mutual paranoia, I think, that's also at work here. I mean, there's lots of ways that we use these terms in a kind of common sense usage, compulsive behavior, we talk about compulsions, we talk about paranoia, we talk about neurosis, we talk about psychosis, in ways that are very common sense, but these have very technical significance for people who work in the field of psychoanalysis and psychiatry. And to understand them as symptomatic of much broader political problems, I think, is very important. And that's what my goal would be. Is so how do we, rather than thinking about them as somatic, or cognitive and purely chemical, or they can be treated chemically or clinically, I think we have to think about them in terms of broader discourses and the way that people are talking about Muslims and talking about them domestically, but talking about them internationally, talking about using the term terrorism as a kind of blanket term to talk about various kinds of actions that aren't always politically motivated, but are given a political motivation after the fact quite often, without actually considering whether or not, there's certain kinds of, even the way, I mean, like, take the example of Libya, I mean, in the past, Gaddafi was referred to as the mad dog. I mean, this kind of like madness is a common sense term to talk about insanity and the assumption that he's insane and detached from reality and capable of reason. That kind of language. I mean, I'm not refuting that. I'm just saying there's a way that common sense terminology is at work, but I think we really need to lift it to a level of really understanding it in a much more complex manner. I mean, the important aspect of a mental health conference on Muslims is also, it gets at a certain kind of complexity. And even the idea of complex itself is a psychoanalytic term, a term used in psychiatry to refer to the relationship, cognitive relationships, psychic relationships, these kinds of things. So I think we have to recognize the complexity of individual Muslims, the complexity of the Muslim community domestically, the complexity of it in international. Okay, thank you.